very much, Christopher. Well, thank you all for coming this evening, early evening, and I'm delighted to talk about books since I make my living writing them. I want to tell you what I think, and afterwards I want to know what you think makes a good book. And for me, the first thing is the characters. Characters I care about. Characters I don't like very much, but as long as you explain to me, the writer, why they're not very nice people, I don't mind. But if they're just nasty and you don't explain anything, that's very irritating. So characters are the top, and I'm going to expand on this later. That's the first on my list. The next is a plot that makes me want to turn the pages over. And I'm sure you've all read books and you've stopped reading. And I'll tell you why. Because you don't care about anybody in the book. And so if somebody falls off a cliff and the writer hasn't made you interested in the character, you don't care. So let him fall off a cliff. Let his mother die, which is terrible, but you think, I don't believe in the character, he's not real, or she's not real, so the mother is not real. So what does it care if she dies? Because it's not real. You've got to make me believe that these characters are real. So the plot and the characters have to be interwoven completely. And then when you've got these two wonderful ingredients in your pot, you have to think, where am I going to put these people? In the Himalayas? Africa? Swansea? Where I come from. I always seem to bring in Swansea wherever I go. Southend? Somewhere exotic? Or somewhere that you know, that you think, I'm not going to use an exotic location, I'm going to use something that I know, and I know what it smells like. I know what the people feel like. I know what the pavements feel like. I know what all the sounds and all the sensory detail that good writers always put into plots. And they know that because they know the area. Now we're very lucky these days, because I wrote a script. This is not a book, but I wrote a script, and it was set in Jamaica. I've never been to Jamaica, but I had a great compliment by somebody, and they said, you know Jamaica really well. And I thought, no, but I did an awful lot of research, but I was setting my plot in the 1830s. So I knew what Jamaica was exactly in the 1830s. The internet can help writers tremendously, so that we can't get the smells and perhaps the sounds unless we've got a vivid imagination. But of course you can create an imaginary world, can't you? And some of you, and one of my students at the back of the room there, is doing just that, a sort of parallel universe. So you can create your own world, and then you can create the characters that go with that world, but you have to know everything about that world to make us believe, I know that world exists somewhere, I just can't imagine it, but he can, or she can. So you've got the characters, you've got the intriguing plot, you've got the unusual or interesting location, and then you have to think, how do these people speak? And you have to get inside the character's head, and I think that's what a lot of writers don't do. They don't get inside the character's head so clearly that you believe the character is speaking and not the writer. If you know your characters very well, which I'll go on to later, you'll know how they speak. And it's not you, the writer, it's the character that's speaking. So if you've got a character that lives in the East End of London and he comes from a really tough background, he is not going to speak in received English. And that sounds, well, obviously he's not going to, but you can't imagine the number of people I've met that write it as if he's gone to Oxford or Cambridge. He's not going to. And you've got to find out how he would speak. Then you start thinking, yeah, this guy really lives. So we've got the dialogue. But what about pacing? Have you ever read a book And the story stops for 2 pages when somebody describes perhaps a wonderful location like Coventry Cathedral or Canterbury Cathedral. Well, it is a wonderful cathedral, but if you stopped the story in Canterbury Cathedral and started talking about the nave and the beautiful, beautiful decorations for 2 pages, I'd start thinking, oh dear, research is showing. You mustn't show your research. You slot it into one of the characters looking up and thinking, I love those perpendicular columns, and it reminds me of so-and-so, and then you don't realise the writer is describing the cathedral because he's doing it through the character's eyes. So it's not you describing it. You could have a character that perhaps doesn't like cathedrals. So how would you describe Canterbury Cathedral then when somebody thinks, it's horrible, it's so big and it's so vast and it's empty and all these people are worshipping something I don't believe in. What a waste of space this is. Why isn't it demolished? Now you might think, that's appalling, but it's not you. It's the character looking at the cathedral, not you. So if you know your character, you describe the events through his or her eyes, and then we believe them. So we've got that. Now we've got the character, the plot, put in the pot, location, the dialogue that you can believe in. You've got the pacing. So if you slow the plot down so somebody's looking at something, you have got to speed it up again. You cannot have slow, 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 slow all the way through the book because we'll stop reading. So how do we do that? Okay, I'll give you a scenario off the top of my head. Somebody walks into a bank and sees something odd. She sees the manager walk into the room and 2 men follow him and they lock the door. And she's outside thinking, what are they doing? I would then cut away to another scene and you, the reader, would think, what are they doing? Why is he interested in those men? And I'll keep you waiting to find out. And the next scene would be something very fast-paced because you've got to contrast it. So you've got a slow pace and a fast pace. So if you think of a novel, it's like an orchestral score. So you've got this symphony and you've got the slow movements, the fast movements, the harmonious movements, and the pow, pow Beethoven movements when you hit them in the face and they go, oh! And you slow it down again. And it's all manipulation because we're the creators of our universes, and you could say, oh, so writers are little megalomaniacs. And they are, in a way, because they're creating human beings, they're creating a world that doesn't exist, and they're forcing you to believe it. And when you get it right, it's absolutely wonderful. And when you don't, it's absolutely dire, and you think, what am I doing here? But it's great when you think the characters are really working and talking to you. The mood. And to describe the mood, I've got a worksheet here, and I'm going to share the mood of something from Rebecca. Last night I went to Mandalay again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me. Now can you hear that poetic, slow, atmospheric opening? It's a dreamy cadence quality to her writing. Daphne du Maurier's, it's a place she's familiar with, and we know that because she says again. So you know that at the beginning of that novel, there's a backstory. And the novel doesn't start there, it starts somewhere else. And she's just shown you that by saying again. Let's compare Daphne du Maurier's opening with Frank McCourt's opening, which I'm sure some of you know, Angela's Ashes. My father and mother should have stayed in New York, where they met and married and where I was born. Instead, they returned to Ireland when I was 4. And my brother Malcolm, 3, and the twins, Oliver and Eugenie, barely 1, and my sister Margaret, dead and gone. When I look back on my childhood, I wonder how I survived it all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth a mention. And that's the mood of this. You think, that's not going to be a happy novel, is it? Not a really happy novel. You compare that opening to Daphne du Maurier's dreamy cadence, and you've got the mood. That's the mood, very clearly. And Angela's Ashes is quite a dismal book, but it's beautifully written, not very happy. And then we have to come to one of the main things that makes you, the reader, want to turn over the pages: conflict. Now, if you've got a whole chapter you've written about this, and you've got a couple going on holiday, they're having a wonderful time. The children having a wonderful time. They're eating ice cream in the sunshine. It's marvellous, and it goes on and on and on. You think, yeah, but what's happening? Nothing. So what have you got to do? Make something unpleasant happen. And unfortunately, that's what we do. You think, and that's what Hollywood films do as well. Have you seen them? They're always having this wonderful, happy gathering of all the relatives, and they're all laughing and joking, and you think, something really bad. And of course they cut away and there's a burglar. Well, they're all sitting eating in the garden, a burglar's ransacking in their house. There's the conflict, the contrast. And as writers, that's what we have to do, not just burglaries, but the contrasts of where we can go next to keep the readers happy, or interested, or shocked, or fascinated, or happy and laughing, or just happy and smiling, depending on the mood of your novel, the novel you want to create. And the ways we do these things, and I'll show you what I did with one of my first books that I wrote. Well, not one of them, it was the first book. And it was called The Invisible Piper, and it was set in the Second World War. And in this book, I centre on 2 families living on the south coast of England during the war. One is middle class and one is working class. The middle class family, because you want to have the contrast, have an evacuee boy who's 10 years old and very, very traumatised and filthy dirty and completely a fish out of water in the middle class home. I mean, I could have put him in the working class home, but I thought, where's the conflict? I want Charlie to go into the middle class home, and they're appalled by the lice in his hair, the filth in his body, the brown paper he's wearing, because his mother said the brown paper will keep you from harm, and you will never get ill because brown paper will stop all the germs getting through to you. And Charlie changes the middle class family, not the other way around. Because Charlie came to me one night when I was in my study, and he became very fond of this family, and they were going to send him away because he was so difficult, because he came from a really, really traumatic background, and they were finding it too hard to cope with him. And I did all my plotting in my study, and I do this in my class. I have all the plots sorted out, and I thought, well, okay, Charlie's going to disappear in chapter 15, and he's out of the book. And I was writing, and Charlie said, I won't go, in my ear. And I just carried on writing. He said, no, it's no good. Whatever you say or do, I will not go, because I've gone to love these people. I don't want to go back to my poverty and my abusive father. I want to stay with them. And I had to change the whole plot for Charlie. And I became very, very fond of a little boy who did not exist, because he was very, very endearing. And he taught me values like, and this came from when I was teaching, one of my students was a boy, a bit like Charlie, came from the East End. And he said to me one day, and I taught him to read, and he didn't want anybody to know I taught him to read. He said, "Here, Linda," because he talked like that. "Me and my dad got this deal for you." And I said, "Deal?" "Yeah, we're going to cut you in." I said, "Cut me into what?" A business. Come on, the business." And I said, "What business?" "Well, we buy and sell things, you know." And I said, what sort of things?" "Well, TVs, you know, furniture, anything really we get hold of." And I said, "Where do you get the money from?" "What money?" "You know, the money to buy the things." He said, "We don't buy them, we nick them, see, and then we sell them on." And I said, "You nick them?" "Yeah." He said, "The problem is my dad, he can't read and write proper, and so he said, if you come in and do the receipts for us, we'll cut your deal and you can have a part of the profits. What do you say?" And I thought, "Bow!" And he said, and he was expecting me to say, "Yeah, what a great idea." And I said, "But, you know, stealing is illegal." He said, "Come on, they've got a lot of money, we haven't. They don't need all this gear, do they? So we just take it off them and then they get a new one." And he said, "They're happy because they've got a new one, or they get it on the insurance, and we're happy." He said, "Who's losing?" And I thought, you can't argue with a kid like that. And Charlie became that child. And you think, you know, all those years later I thought, gosh, this little boy, Tony, has become Charlie. And he was so alive. And Tony, the little boy I taught me a lot. You know, all the middle class values I thought. And I thought, you said you hadn't got a mother. He taught me a heck of a lot about people and their motivation and how they look at the world. And so my Charlie teaches this family to look at life differently and not the other way around. And I really, really became fond of him. But the way I created Charlie is the way that I tell my students to create people, is to know them better than yourself and better than your best friend. You know how they think, how they walk, how they speak, what makes them happy, what makes them sad. What are they prepared to do in life to get what they want? What are they prepared to suffer in life to get what they want? And once you know all these bottom lines, you know this character would not steal to get what he wants. This other character would. And it's the ultimate, and what they really believe in is so important to creating real human beings. And then writers do something that's called foreshadowing. Now, foreshadowing is telling you that something bad might happen. And I will give you some examples. One example is from Truman Capote's Children on Their Birthdays. And this time, it's not something that might happen, it's something that has happened. But he said, yesterday afternoon, the 6 o'clock bus ran over Miss Bobbitt. Now, that was the opening of a book. Well, no, it's a short story, but he was going to develop it into a book. Now, you, as the reader, I presume, thinks, I wonder why it did that. And it's these questions that you think, make us think. Another one, Richard Yates's novel, The Easter Parade. Neither of the Grimm sisters would have a happy life, and looking back, it always seemed that the trouble began with their parents' divorce. And now you know you're being put into the backstory of somebody else's life. That's different ways of using foreshadowing. I'll tell you the way that I used foreshadowing in my book, The Day of the Swans. The Day of the Swans is a psychological thriller, and it focuses on the relationship between a psychological, clinical psychologist and an Austrian man called Stefan. And the relationship is very, very strange because Stefan comes to see Anna, who's a trainee psychologist, and he says, I will only see Anna, I don't want to see anybody else. And she thinks, well, it's very odd. And she has to give him his first session, and he's very difficult to talk to. And this is her asking him some questions, and he hasn't answered any, and she says to him, it would be helpful if you'd answer some questions. All right, he said, as long as they're the right ones. Anna blinked. What did he mean? What were the right ones? In the past, have you had 2 consecutive weeks or more when you felt depressed or when you've lost interest in things you usually enjoy? Yes, said Stefan. Have you had 2 more years in your life when you felt depressed most days? Yes, he answered. Have you felt depressed much of the time in the past year? His face was impassive. Yes? How much time in the past week have you felt depressed? Less than 2 days? No, more like 6 days, Stefan said, smiling at her. But not today. Why would a depressed client smile after saying he was depressed 6 days a week, Anna thought. And then she realised he was playing games with her. And further on, he says, what's cognitive behavioural therapy? And she's a cognitive behavioural therapist. And he knows what it is. And she has to go along with him. We try and find out clients' core beliefs, what he feels about himself and his family and friends, the world in general. We work by identifying how your thoughts, ideas, attitudes and behaviour affect your daily life. And all the time she was talking, he kept nodding as if she was a child to be placated. Then she realised he wasn't listening to her. He was simply staring at her face and her hair. And gradually, through the first session, she starts losing control of the whole thing because he's controlling her. And at the end, she says, I want to help you, but if I can't if you don't give me any information. Why do you think you're depressed? Stefan studied his hands as if seeing them for the first time. My wife left me, he said at last. That must have been a shock for you. Anna suppressed a small smile of triumph. She had taken what Max called the first step. Oh, I knew she'd leave. I just didn't know when. How did you know? I'm clairvoyant, he said. You can see into the future, she said in surprise. And he smiled at her. Mr. Pearson, I would love to help you. Will you let me? Don't call me Mr. Pearson. I haven't changed my name like you, he said. What do you mean I changed my name? You changed your name. I haven't. I think we ought to stop, says Anna. No, he says. Don't stop. Please don't stop. I don't want you to stop. Do you want to know what makes me really depressed? He said. Yes, of course. You, he answered. But me? I've only just met you. Oh, no, he said. Do I really have to go back to the beginning? Of what? Anna said. Your life. And now I'm going to stop there because that's what's called a hook. And now you know that Stefan knows a lot more about Anna than Anna knows about Stefan. And I really, really enjoyed writing that book. The best characters have all got flaws, as we all have. You've all got flaws. And we've all got facets. And so you shouldn't paint somebody all black or all white. You give them these little facets. And then you find out gradually small things about them as you gradually read books. You should do. For me, that's really important. And so you find out a little bit in that chapter about Stefan. And then in a chapter later, you find out a little bit more about Anna. So as you gradually go on, it's almost like, because I write screenplays, it's almost like a camera, and you're on a close-up with somebody, and then you start going back and back and back and back, and you're opening up the whole panorama of one character. But if I reveal too much all at once, you don't want to carry on, do you? To read, because you know everything about them. So you keep things back. So the best writers are, you learn little bits, and gradually, little plants they're called. So in each, perhaps, if you can, each chapter, you learn a little bit more about either the characters, or more about the story, or the locations and how they affect the person. So you're learning all this, and gradually you're revealing more and more detail until the ending comes, and then you decide, do I want a surprise ending, which I did in The Day of the Swans, or do I want an ending that makes people feel really satisfied? And you have to decide. There might be some of you in the audience that love happy endings. There might be others that like slightly ambiguous endings, so the ending lingers in your mind, and you can work out the characters go on living. Because if you shut it all down, the characters stop. You stop the page, characters then stop moving, stop living. I like it when I think the characters are going to go on living even though I stop writing their lives. And I think that's absolutely wonderful if you can do that. In A Fatal Facade, which is the first crime thriller I've written, the main character is Jack, a detective who's given up being a detective, and we don't know why. And of course I don't tell you for a long time. He's got a lot of guilt. And then you meet somebody else through his death. And here's Jack looking at himself in the mirror, and he's not happy with what he sees. Jack stared at the man in his bathroom mirror, amazed at his reflection. A tired 48-year-old stranger stared back at him with a face so crumpled it looked as if people had been drying their hands on it. How had it happened? He used to jog every morning before work. He'd start again. He had to keep fit for Lucy. He swallowed some sleeping tablets quickly and had a pee. Worry. That's what's aged me. Why should I care about the death of one more man? What does it matter if Paolo Cellini was murdered or not? Why can't I stop thinking about a naked body lying on the marble floor, covered by a small white towel? He snapped the light off and stumbled out of the room, exhausted. But the question kept circling his mind as he walked up the corridor towards his son's bedroom. Who covers himself with a small white towel when he's having a heart attack? And I hope I've intrigued you, because that's what intrigues Jack. It's that small little detail. He finds a man lying on the bathroom. He's very wealthy. He's an art dealer, and he's not old. He's a young guy in his 20s, but he's got a heart condition. But he knows he was murdered just because he was covered with a small white towel. And I saw that image very clearly in my head, and I thought that's going to be the telling detail that gives Jack the impetus to carry on. And through finding out the man or woman, I'm not saying who it was, that killed this art dealer, I mean, he's not a very nice person, this art dealer, but you find out reasons why. That's Jack's idea for getting him back to redeem himself with his son, who's disgusted his father's not in the force, and now he's working as a chauffeur. I mean, how terrible is that for a young boy? His father was a big detective, and now he's working as a chauffeur, and he's embarrassed. So he finds that this is the way he'll go back into the police force if he can find the killer, and everybody else that thinks that the man died of natural causes. Jack knows he didn't. And so while he's doing this, finding out about this man, he meets all these fascinating people like Bianca, who's a jazz singer. And I used to be a jazz singer, so I used all the information I learned about that, and I've sung in some sleazy places as well, as Bianca did. She's obsessed with Paolo, and Paolo's pretty nasty. And I'll show you a small scene for Bianca and Paolo, and he returns from one of his visits. He acquires things, he acquires women, and he acquires things, because he's the collector of things. And he shows her the most beautiful, beautiful jewel. And he puts this beautiful, beautiful crystal round her neck. It's green crystal. And this is just halfway through. And she'd asked him a question. He hates being questioned, where am I going to see you again? And she asks him, and he just blanks her out. Bianca busied herself with putting on her black dress. It was made especially for her. She looked into the mirror and saw Paolo frowning at her. What's wrong? Surely you can see. Bianca saw a dark-skinned, sexy woman wearing a priceless emerald around her neck. She knew she looked stunning. Do you know what causes that distinctive rich green? Paolo said. Bianca shook her head. She was a nightclub singer. What did she know about emeralds? Chromium impurities. Paolo stared at the emerald. Completely flawless. He paused for some time. Of course, it's all wrong. What is? You and the emerald. Turn around. Bianca obeyed him, trying not to shiver as his fingers touched the back of her neck. He took the emerald off and placed it carefully in a quilted box. Her breath control was perfect. She was determined not to show any emotion, not this time. Will I see you tomorrow? She couldn't help herself. Paolo frowned as if he was really considering the question. I don't know. He glanced at his watch. Maybe I'll give you a call. He placed the quilted box carefully in his Armani suit pocket before saying, by the way, I didn't buy the emerald for you. I just wanted you to see how beautiful it is. And that's Paolo. And you know by that piece of dialogue, Paolo's a very cruel man. Now I could have said, Paolo's a cruel man, or I could have shown you that he's a cruel man. So I showed you through his actions and his dialogue what the character was like. And that's what you really need to do to get you to believe that he is cruel. Or that she's a very feisty woman, but she's not feisty with Paolo because she adores him. And she allows him to treat her like a victim. And then you see her with everybody else and she's really full of herself and you think, gosh, he's got a hold on her. If you do like writing, I hope you buy this. I've called it How to Write Great Short Stories, but it's also for novel writers as well, because I'm using a lot of different techniques and about the techniques that you need to use within your writing, and using things like suspense. And I'll tell you, the master of suspense, of course, just before I finish, is Alfred Hitchcock. And if you think of Alfred Hitchcock, to show you what he did, you'd have a lone woman lying in bed. And of course, where would the location be? A dark, lonely house. At night, there's the mood. You don't want it in the day, do you? With, you know, your happy sunshine. She's alone at night. And then you cut away from the dark, lonely bedroom in the dark, lonely house to footsteps going up when they're creaking. And you think, oh my God. We all think, what's going to happen? And then what do? Go back to the bedroom and she wakes up and she hears it. Now, a good writer would say, and now I'm going to pull you away from that scene, and the writer of a book would, they wouldn't in a film, they'd carry on. In a book, and you'd have to wait to find out, you'd be thinking, oh, God, what's happened to that girl? But you can't leave those in suspense too long, and then you go back to the girl. And then you decide, is she going to get away? Or is this man, what's he going to do to her? So it's suspense that you need, and that's why we all read books, because we have to know what's going to happen next. Anyway, over to you for questions. Yes?
You got there, had to write great screenplays to get it into production.
Yes.
Have you any produced any great screenplays? And is it the same process to write a novel or a short story to a great screenplay?
It's a very different technique. For a novel, you have to be able to plan, so I was talking about description. In a novel, I'd use my Jamaican script. In a novel, I would say, she was called Annie Palmer. Annie Palmer's beautiful mahogany furniture was curled with so-and-so, and she lay in bed looking at this, and I could do that for a page as long as I was describing it through Annie Palmer's eyes. In a screenplay, 18th century mahogany furniture, full stop, onto the action. It's a completely different craft, and you have to think in visuals, so each scene is very short visuals. As a writer of novels, you've got the luxury of being able to embellish that scene. But I like writing both. It's a challenge, and I have adapted, and I'm still waiting for my agent to get one of my big screenplays. I've got small ones, but screenplays are so expensive to put on. And of course, a lot of them lose a lot of money. So everybody's very, very worried about losing a lot of money. But I live in hope that my big screenplay on Owen Glendower, this has nothing to do with novels, but I have to say, is with working titles at the moment, and I am so excited. It might not be in 4 months' time when they say we're not going to do it, but it's a big feature film, like a Welsh Braveheart, and that's going to cost a lot of money. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could give any advice on how to publish a book or how to get the book published?
You've got to write the most scintillating blurb and synopsis of your life. So you've written this wonderful book, and then you have to write a blurb. You know, the blurb is at the back of the book. All right, you might not say, oh, I don't think that's very scintillating, but I'm going to give you what I wrote. A Fatal Facade is a crime thriller that focuses on the lives of 4 people who become involved with Paolo Cellini, a 30-year-old wealthy art dealer who is killed in his marbled bathroom in Chelsea, London. And that's the small blurb, and then you go down a little bit more to describe a bit more of the book. Each person is linked to Cellini in unusual ways. His lover, Bianca Vella, a Maltese nightclub singer who worships him. Rico Batez, his Filipino nightclub manager who hates him. Angelica Logan, a woman with too many terrible secrets. And Jack Bradley, an ex-DCI who needs to redeem himself to his family and his colleagues by discovering the truth about the life and death of Cellini. Now, I hope if you like crime thrillers, you'd be interested in the characters with that. And I've also, the theme of it is all about forgiveness. Trying to find ways to forgive others and also yourself. But writing the synopsis, I will tell you now, is incredibly hard. And one of my students worked on it for 3 months before he got it right. Because it has to be 1 page and it's got to be jumping. So if you're writing a comedy, the synopsis has to be funny. You know, I had a student once and she said, this is a really funny book, and the synopsis went on and it wasn't funny at all. And I said, but they're not going to think you can write comedy because this is really flat. You have to make them smile. So once she got the fact that it was in the genre of her novel, it worked. So if you're writing a thriller, it's got to be, woo, you know, edge of the seat thing. Or a fantasy, it's got to be mysterious. So, are you writing yourself?
Yeah, I've written like a manuscript, and I'm wondering how I can go about maybe getting.
You have to come on my 4-week course, and I will tell you how to do it.
Okay.
Because I do, in my courses, I do marketing as well, because it is very hard to get published. It is.
Okay.
But there are ways you can do it to get ahead of the game, and I'm happy to tell you what I teach my students.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
You talked about an overarching theme. What comes first for you? The idea for that, or the idea for the sort of plot which carries the theme?
Well, it's different for different novels. I'll tell you what came first with the Day of the Swans. It was an image. And it was an image, I grew up in Wales, on the Gower coast, there's the most stunning beach called Rhossili Bay, and it's miles and miles and miles of beautiful curving yellow sand. And I was lying in bed and I had a picture in my mind of 2 children, one older, well he's not, so he was 14, and one child. And they were running across the sands, hand in hand, and then they see 3 white swans and their arms, and they start running across the sand. And I thought, my 2 characters, I didn't know who they were, and that was the image, and that came to me like a lot of writers. I was just dozing in bed and the image came and I thought, I'm going to write a book. And that's where Stefan takes Anna to this remote white house. There's a white house on the cliff. But in another one, I will just think of one character, it'll come. So it's different, and I'm sure it is for other writers as well, because I've listened to other writers. And, you know, one time, the subconscious is a very interesting thing, because you can, when you're lying in bed, well, for me anyway, and I'm just waking up, wonderful things happen then. Then my ideas flow. And I rush to my computer and think, yes, or no, it's rubbish. Depending on whether the idea has legs. And if you think in a week's time, those people are going to start breathing soon, then you carry on. You want to write as well?
I do like short stories.
Oh, do you?
I've got 17 chapters of a crime novel.
Oh, have you? Oh, that's interesting. Ah, well, I hope to see you next year then, so you can carry on with the end of the chapters. Yes, it is a wonderful process. Can I tell you what Anton Chekhov once said about the difference between short stories and novels? He said a short story is the encapsulation of one moment in somebody's life, and a novel is the whole life. For most people, it is more complicated when you're writing a novel. You've got more complications going through it than a short story. But they're both, short stories can be really beautiful. And they're really hard to do. You know, people think, well, it's very short, so it can't be very difficult. It is, to get it right, as I'm sure you know.
I was just interested whether you started with the novel or whether you started with the screenplay.
I started writing through writing poetry. Now, poetry is my real love, but I won a poetry competition and I was so ecstatic. And I won £30. And I thought, this poem has taken me 5 months to write, and I won £30. I could starve to death. So I love poetry because it's so condensed. You know, you're taking a picture of perhaps one person walking down the street and you encapsulate that one moment. And I do love it. But it's also very good for writing novels because you can't waste words in a poem. You can't. But then I went on to short stories. And funny enough, I went on to write my Owen Glendower script next, and then I went on to novels. But I like different genres. I mean, some people say I just want to write novels, and other people short stories. Everyone's different, and whatever is best for the person. Or you might not want to write at all, and I can't understand that, but a lot of people don't. And but they have the ideas. But yeah, that's what is wonderful about life, isn't it? It's the variety of people you meet.
I was just going to ask, but you didn't mention the use of metaphor when you're talking about foreshadowing, and sometimes the sort of stories in the details as much as in the sort of manifest plot.
Mm. Well, of course it is. It depends on the type of novel or short story you're writing. Metaphors and similes are really important, and I love them. And I've got a whole chapter on grammar and different parts of speech in my book on short story and novel writing. But for me, what's even more powerful than a metaphor is a verb. And I'll tell you why, because if I'm using a verb in a sentence, it's very powerful. If I say to you, John walked into the room, do you know how John's feeling? No. If I said to you, John bounded into the room, action man, he's happy, John stumbled into the room, and that verb, if you're writing, lads, get your verb sorted, is really, really powerful. And it's something that a lot of writers don't think about, and they'll just say somebody's walking in here, sauntering. I mean, it just gives you an impression of somebody's state of mind, and I think that is, but I would not say that I use metaphors and similes, but the poor verb is overlooked a lot, and I think you must, keep the verb alive a lot more, very, very specific verbs, and then you wouldn't need so many adverbs. And I've got a thing about adverbs, I don't like them. But there we are. I think a strong verb and you don't need the adverb.
Do you say something about your writing process and the plotting that you do? Do you nail everything down, or do you allow space to be quite creative within your...
Right, it's a difficult one. I'm at the moment I'm plotting a novel in my head, and it keeps changing, and at the moment I'm not writing, and I've written a little down, but until the characters start speaking to me, and I know what they're thinking, what they're doing, what their parents were doing, what they were doing when they were 5 or 15, whether they're happy being by themselves, I can't write the person and I can't write the plot. They haven't come to me fully formed yet, so I'm doing that. But once I've got that, then I sit down with the computer and I'm quite detailed. You'll find other writers have different methods. This is what I think is the most effective method, that you say, okay, for instance, Anna, she meets Stefan in chapter 2, but I don't just do that, I say, Stefan reveals more about Anna than he reveals to her. Intrigue. And then I say, wait for 2 chapters, and then I do like bullet points, and I go through it, and I know the ending. But don't think, if you do that, you think, oh, that's very rigid then. And I will stick to that until a character says, like my Charlie, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go out. And then I replot. And it's an organic process. But the awful thing is, I think, is if, I've had students that have gone halfway through a novel, and they said, no, I don't want to do any plotting, I just want to get on with the writing. And they get halfway through it, and they said, I have no idea what's going on now. Because there's bits there, it's like building a house, and the house is, there's no foundation, there's no architect, and they've got a gym over there which is collapsing, and a scullery over there, and there's no connection between them. So it's the building blocks of getting it, and so you think, and then you can be really creative. But I would not say that there's one method that any writer should use. If you can find, if you're interested in writing, you find a method that really works for you, I would say use it. Have you?
Well, I haven't been successful, but yeah, I have an idea of a framework for the
Yes.
for the novel and where it's going.
Right.
That it's in between. I'm needing more space to be a bit more creative with, but then I risk needing to change things and
Yes.
make it something different.
Yeah, but it is really important to know vaguely, not vaguely, but to know what the ending is until you decide to change it. Because otherwise it's like getting on a bus and they say, well, you can't now. They do. Where do you want to go? And you say, I haven't a clue. And you never get there. So you've got to know your destination. You really need to do it. So, I always think of plotting as like a long meandering path. And sometimes you've got little paths go off there, but you've got to think, oh God, I've got them all over the place and I've got to go push them all back together again.
What if I am writing something and then I get a totally new idea and then want to write that and don't want to write the one I was writing before? Shall I just force myself to stick with my original idea, or shall I just continue with my new one?
That is the process I'm going through at the moment. I've got this wonderful idea, and then I've got another wonderful idea which doesn't go with the first wonderful idea. Then I'm thinking, I've got too many wonderful ideas. And then I'm thinking, perhaps none of them are wonderful. What you're going through is the process of writing. It's really difficult. Once you know your characters really well, your characters will say, like my Charlie, that's the idea. That's where I'm going. And it's not just the idea you've got. I've got an idea, okay. I've got an idea off the top of my head for a romantic comedy, which is incredibly hard to write. Boy meets girl. Boy falls in love with girl. Boy doesn't get girl. He's got to find out a way of doing it. You think, that's been done to death. I've got to think of a way that nobody else has shown how the boy gets the girl, or the other way around. And once you know the characters, what the boy wants, what the girl wants, then the story starts coming, and the idea it's not just an idea then, it becomes a plot. And so say to yourself, not what the idea is, say to yourself, how many characters have you got in your idea? Tell me, how many characters have you got in your idea?
So when I get an idea, the characters just come later. So
do they?
Usually I start with no characters.
Okay, you start with a theme then. Like
Yes.
you could say a theme like betrayal. But then when you do that, that's your idea, then you've got to say to yourself, who do I want to illustrate this idea? Do I want a 60-year-old man, a 9-year-old boy, or a 17-year-old boy? And then you start going, and then you're getting closer and closer to the story. So if you do that, think to yourself, okay, that's my idea. Go down the page and think, okay, who am I going to illustrate? Get 2 characters to start with and give them a problem, both of them. And they have to solve it. And you make it hard for them. And give them complications. And then then it'll work. I hope it works out for you.
How would you end the story with a good ending, like the readers are satisfied? How it ends?
Well, okay, I'll tell you, I'll use this as an example. When I finished, where is it? This. My Spitfire pilot was bailing out of a plane and he was getting burnt. And I thought, what's going to happen to this? There's his plane, and I thought, now is Rob going to die? And somebody said to me, you cannot let Rob die because I am gunning for him. And at the end of that book, he's on a sortie, and have you ever heard of people tipping bombs. Well, you have to read this book, you see. The Spitfire pilots, some of them, if they were very brave, went alongside a flying bomb and they tipped the fins of them, so that's what he does. And it's very tense, and I was tense writing it, and I thought, is he going to die? And I was saying this to myself, is he going to die? Is he going to survive? And I thought, no, you've got to survive, Rob. So I said, come on, make it. And he does. And I knew that if I let Rob die, it would be a really horrible ending, because people had invested the time to read 2 books. So, you know, and I let him die, and they'd all go, oh, God, no, he's dead. All that, and you know, what's the point of reading them? I let him live, but I gave him a lot of problems. So that's how you do it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope some of you are interested in buying my books. And I'll
So we'd
hear.
like to thank you.